October 24th, 1944, 0530 hours. Flight deck of USS Essex, Philippine Sea. Lieutenant Commander David McCampbell stood in the pre-dawn darkness, watching his plane captain complete the pre-flight inspection on his F-6 F-5 Hellcat, Bureau number 70143. The carrier's deck trembled beneath his boots as 32,000 tons of warship turned into the wind at 27 knots, preparing to launch the largest coordinated carrier strike in naval history. 73 American carriers, 17 fleet carriers, 18 light carriers, and 38 escort carriers had assembled in Philippine waters carrying over 1,000 combat aircraft. Their mission: destroy the Imperial Japanese Navy's last operational fleet before it could reach the American landing forces at Leyte Gulf. Intelligence indicated 3 separate Japanese task forces converging on the invasion beaches from multiple directions, representing virtually every major warship Japan still possessed. McCampbell had studied the reconnaissance photographs during the 2 a.m. briefing. Admiral Takeo Kurita's center force, steaming through the Philippine Sea, included the battleships Yamato and Musashi, the 2 largest warships ever constructed. Each displaced 72,000 tons, fully loaded and mounted 9 18-inch guns, capable of hurling 3,200-pound armor-piercing shells, 26 miles. Their main battery turrets alone weighed more than an entire American destroyer. For 18 months, the Imperial Japanese Navy had avoided decisive engagement, husbanding its remaining strength, while American industrial production buried the Pacific in new carriers, battleships, and aircraft. But the invasion of the Philippines represented an existential threat to Japan's southern resource areas. Without access to oil from the Dutch East Indies and raw materials from Southeast Asia, Japan's war economy would collapse within months. Naval headquarters, and in Tokyo, had therefore committed every operational warship to Operation Sho-Go, a desperate all-or-nothing gamble to destroy American amphibious forces at their most vulnerable moment. The tactical arithmetic seemed impossible. Kurita's battleships possessed armor plating 16 inches thick, designed to withstand direct hits from 16-inch naval guns. American carrier aircraft carried bombs and torpedoes, developed for attacking cruisers and destroyers, not super-battleships built to specifications that defied conventional naval architecture. Yamato's armor scheme incorporated lessons from 20 years of naval design evolution, with compartmentalized damage control systems that could sustain multiple torpedo hits without sinking. But McCampbell understood something that Japanese admirals had failed to grasp during 3 years of carrier warfare. Battleship armor protected against horizontal fire shells arriving at relatively flat trajectories from surface combatants. Carrier aircraft attacked from above, dropping bombs that struck deck plating designed to resist only splinter damage from near misses. A 1,000-pound armor-piercing bomb falling from 12,000 feet achieved terminal velocity sufficient to penetrate even Yamato's deck armor, detonating deep inside the ship's vitals where no amount of side armor provided protection. The F-6 F-5 Hellcat represented the culmination of American naval aviation development since Pearl Harbor. Grumman's engineers had created a fighter optimized for carrier operations rather than absolute performance, incorporating pilot feedback from combat veterans like McCampbell, who understood that survivability mattered more than speed records. The aircraft's R2800 double Wasp engine produced 2,000 horsepower, enough to carry a 2,000-pound bomb load plus 6 50-caliber machine guns with 400 rounds per weapon. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. McCampbell's combat record testified to the Hellcat's effectiveness against Japanese aircraft. 34 confirmed victories made him the Navy's leading ace, but his tactical innovations had contributed more to American air superiority than individual kill counts. His doctrine emphasized patience over aggression, altitude advantage over turning combat, and coordinated section tactics rather than lone wolf heroics. These principles had transformed Navy fighter squadrons from vulnerable formations that suffered 40% casualty rates during 1942 into the dominant air power in the Pacific theater. At 0545 hours, Essex's flight deck loudspeakers crackled with the air boss's voice. "Launch the deck load. Fighter pilots, man your aircraft." McCampbell climbed into his Hellcats cockpit, the familiar routine providing comfort before combat. Shoulder harness secure. Seat adjusted. Trim tabs neutral. Fuel selector on main tank. The R-2800 engine coughed to life with a throaty roar that vibrated through the aircraft's structure. 18 cylinders firing in sequence as the supercharger wind up to operating speed. The Carrier Air Group commander, Commander Dan Smith, would lead the strike with 64 aircraft, 24 Hellcat fighters, 24 SB-2C Helldiver dive bombers, and 16 TBM Avenger torpedo bombers. McCampbell's fighter division would fly top cover at 18,000 feet, protecting the strike aircraft from Japanese fighters while maintaining position to dive on any warships that appeared through cloud cover. Launch procedures demonstrated the mechanical precision that American carrier operations had achieved through 2 years of combat evolution. Every 90 seconds, another aircraft roared down Essex's deck, catapulted into the grey dawn sky by steam-powered machinery that accelerated 20,000-pound fighters to flying speed in less than 300 feet. The entire deck load cleared the carrier in 14 minutes, forming up in designated sectors while orbiting at 2,000 feet. McCampbell's division climbed through broken cloud layers, the 4 Hellcats maintaining loose formation that allowed constant visual scanning while conserving fuel. Dawn painted the eastern horizon gold and orange, revealing scattered cumulus clouds between 3 and 10,000 feet that would complicate bombing accuracy, but provide concealment for low-level approach. Navigation to the target area required dead reckoning across 200 miles of open ocean, with only compass heading and airspeed to guide the formation toward the Philippine Sea. The first radar contact appeared at 0632 hours. Smith's radio call cut through the tactical frequency. "Bandits, Angels 12, bearing 340, 20 miles. Tally-ho, tally-ho." McCampbell scanned the indicated bearing, his eyes detecting movement against the cloud backdrop, a formation of Japanese fighters climbing to intercept the American strike. 16, Mitsubishi. A 6M-0 fighters from the aircraft carrier Zuikaku had launched from Clark Field before dawn, with orders to defend Kurita's battleships against expected carrier attacks. Their pilots represented Japan's dwindling reserve of experienced aviators, men who had survived 2 years of attrition warfare that had killed 80% of their original training classes. But experience couldn't compensate for aircraft that had become obsolete against American technological development. The Zero fighter had dominated Pacific air combat during 1942 through extreme maneuverability and long range achieved by eliminating armor protection and self-sealing fuel tanks. But by October 1944, those design choices had become fatal liabilities. The Hellcat carried 250 pounds of armor plate, protecting the pilot, engine, and oil cooler. Its fuel tanks incorporated rubber bladders that sealed automatically when punctured by gunfire. The Zero offered no such protection. A single 50 caliber round through the fuel tank created an immediate conflagration. McCampbell rolled into a diving attack from 18,000 feet, his division following in coordinated pairs. The altitude advantage provided by early radar warning meant Japanese fighters were still climbing when American guns opened fire at 800 yards. The Hellcats' 650 caliber machine guns delivered 3,600 rounds per minute, enough concentrated firepower to destroy a fighter with a 2-second burst. The lead Zero exploded in mid-air as McCampbell's tracers converged on its unprotected fuel tank, the fireball sending burning debris tumbling through the formation. His wingman, Lieutenant Roy Rushing, fired a deflection shot at a Zero, attempting a climbing turn. The sustained burst, severing the Japanese fighter's tail assembly and sending it into an inverted spin toward the ocean below. The engagement lasted 4 minutes. 8 Japanese fighters destroyed, 6 damaged sufficiently to abort their interception, with 2 Hellcats suffering minor battle damage that didn't affect combat capability. The numerical and technological advantages that American industry had created during 3 years of total war mobilization had transformed air combat into predictable mathematics. Japanese pilots with 2,000 hours training time flew aircraft designed in 1939 against American pilots with 600 hours flying machines, incorporating combat lessons from 100 major engagements. Smith's strike formation continued toward the Philippine Sea, while McCampbell's division resumed station at altitude, their fuel gauges showing 75% remaining enough for 2 hours of combat operations before requiring tanker support. The broken cloud deck thinned as they approached the target area, revealing blue-green water below with occasional whitecaps, indicating wind speeds near 20 knots. At 07:14 hours, radar operators aboard Essex detected multiple surface contacts bearing 285 degrees, range 85 miles. Smith acknowledged the vector and adjusted course 5 degrees north, his formation descending to 12,000 feet to establish optimal dive-bombing altitude. McCampbell maintained position 3,000 feet above the strike group, scanning continuously for additional Japanese fighters while monitoring his engine instruments. The Imperial Japanese Navy's center force appeared through scattered clouds at 07:29 hours. 23 warships in multiple columns, spanning 5 miles of ocean. Leading the formation were battleships Yamato and Musashi, their massive pagoda superstructures creating distinctive silhouettes visible from 30 miles. Heavy cruisers Tone, Chikuma, Haguro and Miyoko steamed in supporting positions, their 8-inch gun turrets trained skyward in anticipation of air attack. 11 destroyers maintained anti-submarine screening positions while zigzagging at 24 knots. Admiral Kurita had received warnings of approaching American aircraft from his radar operators at 0700 hours, giving his ships 29 minutes to prepare defensive measures. Anti-aircraft crews manned their weapons, primarily 25mm automatic cannons in twin and triple mounts, positioned throughout each warship's superstructure. The IJN had installed these weapons in increasing numbers during 1943 and 44, but Japanese optical fire control systems lagged significantly behind American radar-directed gunnery. Smith's attack plan reflected tactical doctrine developed through 2 years of carrier operations against increasingly sophisticated Japanese defenses. The Hellcat fighters would strafe anti-aircraft positions during the initial approach, suppressing defensive fire, while Helldiver dive bombers established their attack geometry from 12,000 feet. Avenger torpedo bombers would coordinate their runs from opposite sides, forcing the target vessel to choose between 2 simultaneous threats, while maximizing the probability that at least some torpedoes would achieve hits. McCampbell watched the carefully choreographed attack develop below him. 12 Hellcats dove toward Musashi at 400 knots, their combined firepower of 72 50-caliber machine guns raking the battleship's superstructure and deck positions. The sustained strafing killed or wounded dozens of anti-aircraft crew members, temporarily reducing defensive fire by an estimated 30%. Seconds later, 16 Helldiver dive bombers rolled into 70-degree attack dives, their pilots compensating for wind drift and target movement, while maintaining precise airspeed through the envelope where their Norden bomb sights calculated release points. The first 1,000-pound armor-piercing bomb struck Musashi's forecastle at 07:33 hours, penetrating the deck plating before detonating inside a crew compartment. The explosion killed 48 sailors and started fires in adjacent spaces, but caused no significant structural damage to a ship designed to absorb such punishment. The second bomb hit near the No. 2 main battery turret, again penetrating deck armor before exploding. Fragmentation damage destroyed fire control equipment and disabled 2 25mm gun mounts, but the third bomb achieved what naval architects called a golden BB, a hit in precisely the location necessary to cause disproportionate damage. The 1,000-pound warhead struck directly on the seam between deck plating and the battleship's armored citadel, its shaped charge design focusing explosive force downward through the thinner armor junction. The detonation breached Musashi's inner hull, allowing seawater to flood into No. 4, boiler room. Simultaneously, 8 TBM Avenger torpedo bombers approached from port and starboard quarters, their pilots maintaining formation discipline despite intense anti-aircraft fire that filled the sky with black smoke bursts and tracer streams. The Mark 13 aerial torpedo had finally become a reliable weapon after 18 months of engineering modifications that corrected depth-keeping problems and contact exploder failures that had plagued earlier versions. Lieutenant Commander John Murphy's Avenger released its torpedo at 800 yards, the weapon entering the water cleanly and accelerating to 33 knots on an intercept course with Musashi's port side. The battleship's captain ordered emergency turn to starboard, but 72,000 tons of steel couldn't maneuver quickly enough to avoid the approaching weapon. The torpedo struck below the waterline amidships, its 600-pound warhead detonating against the anti-torpedo bulge, a protective compartment specifically designed to absorb such hits. The explosion created a massive waterspout visible from 10 miles away, but Musashi's sophisticated damage control systems contained the flooding to designated compartments. Watertight doors sealed automatically. Pumps began evacuating seawater, and repair parties responded with practiced efficiency. Within 15 minutes, the battleship had compensated for the list caused by flooding, maintaining formation speed at 22 knots. Smith's strike group departed the target area at 0750 hours, their ammunition expended and fuel states requiring immediate return to carrier. The attack had achieved 5 bomb hits and 2 torpedo hits against Musashi, plus 3 bomb hits on heavy cruiser Myoko. American losses totaled 2 aircraft, 1 Helldiver destroyed by anti-aircraft fire, 1 Avenger that crashed during water landing after suffering engine damage. Both crews were recovered by submarine lifeguard stations positioned along the strike route. McCampbell's division escorted the returning aircraft back to Essex, landing aboard at 0920 hours with enough fuel remaining for 10 additional minutes of flight. The carrier's deck crew immediately began refueling and rearming procedures, preparing the Hellcats for a second strike scheduled to launch at 1100 hours. McCampbell attended the mission debrief in Essex's ready room, where intelligence officers documented every observation about Japanese defensive tactics, damage assessment, and aircraft performance. The information provided immediate tactical value. Commander Smith emphasized that Musashi had absorbed 7 major weapons hits without significant reduction in combat capability, confirming that super-battleships required sustained attack by multiple carrier air groups to achieve mission kill results. The anti-aircraft fire had been intensive but poorly coordinated, with Japanese gunners apparently lacking radar fire and control systems that allowed American ships to achieve lethal accuracy against attacking aircraft. At 10:30 hours, Admiral Mark Mitcher issued operations orders for the second strike wave. 8 American carriers would launch coordinated attacks against Kurita's center force, delivering an estimated 300 aircraft against targets that had already suffered damage from the morning mission. Essex would contribute 68 aircraft, 24 Hellcats, 24 Helldivers, and 20 Avengers. McCampbell would again lead the fighter escort, this time with explicit orders to strafe anti-aircraft positions immediately before the dive bombers began their attacks. The briefing revealed that photo reconnaissance had detected Musashi trailing oil and exhibiting a slight list to port despite apparent damage control efforts. Intelligence analysts estimated the battleship had suffered flooding in multiple compartments, reducing its maximum speed to approximately 20 knots. Admiral Kurita had detached 2 destroyers to provide close escort, suggesting concern about Musashi's vulnerability to submarine attack if separated from the main formation. Launch procedures began at 1100 hours under clearing skies that promised unlimited visibility over the target area. McCampbell's Hellcat lifted from Essex's deck, the familiar acceleration pressing him into his seat as the carrier's catapult flung 12,000 pounds of fighter aircraft into the air. The strike group formed up quickly, profiting from procedures refined through hundreds of previous missions. Within 20 minutes, all 68 aircraft orbited at assigned altitudes, while squadron commanders verified radio communications and navigation equipment. The flight to the target area covered 180 miles, requiring 45 minutes at cruise speed. McCampbell used the transit time to review attack procedures with his division leaders, emphasizing the importance of suppressing anti-aircraft fire during the critical seconds, when dive bombers established their attack geometry. The Hellcats' 6 50-caliber machine guns carried 400 rounds per weapon, providing approximately 30 seconds of sustained fire if pilots maintained trigger discipline and fired only during optimal gunnery solutions. Kurita's formation appeared at 11:52 hours, still steaming northeast toward San Bernardino Strait despite the morning's attacks. The battleships maintained their column formation, but photo reconnaissance had been accurate. Musashi had fallen slightly behind, her speed reduced to 18 knots by progressive flooding that damage control parties couldn't fully contain. The battleship's list had increased to approximately 5 degrees, creating a visible asymmetry in her silhouette. This time, American strike coordinators concentrated their attacks on the damaged battleship rather than distributing weapons across multiple targets. The tactical logic was brutal but mathematically sound. A wounded super-battleship represented an easier kill than undamaged vessels, and eliminating Yamato's sister ship would significantly degrade Japanese fleet firepower. Smith's strike group would attack simultaneously with aircraft from carriers Lexington, Enterprise, and Franklin, creating a coordinated assault by over 200 aircraft against a single target. McCampbell's Hellcats dove toward Musashi at 0 to 700 feet per minute, accelerating past 400 knots as they descended through 10,000 feet. His gun sight reticle settled on the battleship's superstructure, where clusters of 25mm gun mounts concentrated their fire against approaching aircraft. At 2,000 yards, he opened fire, his 6 machine guns converging on a triple gun mount positioned below the aft fire control tower. The 50-caliber rounds struck with devastating effect, the armor-piercing incendiary ammunition, penetrating the gun mount's thin shields and detonating among the crew servicing the weapons. McCampbell held his trigger for 3 seconds, expending 180 rounds before pulling up sharply to avoid the battleship's superstructure. Behind him, 7 additional Hellcats repeated the attack profile, systematically suppressing defensive positions along Musashi's port side. The coordinated strafing reduced anti-aircraft fire by an estimated 50% during the critical 30 seconds when dive bombers established their attack runs. 16 Helldivers from Essex rolled into 70-degree dives from 12,000 feet, their pilots compensating for Musashi's reduced speed and predictable course. The battleship's captain attempted evasive maneuvers, but the flooding-induced list limited his tactical options. Sharp turns risked capsizing an already compromised vessel. 7 bombs hit Musashi during the attack, 4 achieving deck penetration before detonation. 1 struck near the forward fire control station, destroying radar equipment and killing the gunnery officer along with his entire staff. Another penetrated into the number 7 boiler room, the explosion rupturing steam lines and causing secondary damage throughout the engineering spaces. The most devastating hit struck amidships near the waterline, the bomb penetrating through multiple decks before detonating inside a fuel bunker. The resulting explosion created massive internal flooding that overwhelmed damage control capabilities. Simultaneously, 26 TBM Avengers attacked from multiple directions, their pilots executing coordinated runs that prevented Musashi from presenting stern or bow aspects to all approaching torpedoes. 13 torpedoes hit the battleship's hull within a 4-minute period, each 600-pound warhead detonating against compartments already weakened by previous attacks. The cumulative damage exceeded even Musashi's sophisticated damage control systems. At 12:32 hours, Admiral Kurita received Musashi's damage report via signal light. The battleship's radio systems had been destroyed during the attacks. The message documented catastrophic flooding in 7 major compartments, progressive list now exceeding 15 degrees, maximum speed reduced to 8 knots, and main battery fire control systems inoperative. The ship's captain, Rear Admiral Toshihira Inoguchi, requested permission to beach the vessel on Sibuyan Island to prevent total loss, but Kurita had no destroyers available to provide escort through waters where American submarines maintained constant patrol. McCampbell's division departed the target area at 12:40 hours, their ammunition expended and fuel gauges showing minimum reserves for carrier recovery. During the return flight, his radar intercept officer monitored tactical frequencies as strike coordinators from 3 additional carrier groups arrived over the target and commenced their attacks against Musashi. The damaged battleship endured 5 separate strikes during a 3-hour period, absorbing an estimated 19 torpedo hits and 17 bomb hits, more cumulative damage than any warship in naval history. At 15:35 hours, Musashi capsized and sank in the Philippine Sea, taking with her 1,023 officers and enlisted men. Half of her crew survived the sinking, rescued by destroyers that Admiral Kurita detached from the main formation, despite concerns about submarine threats. The super-battleship's destruction represented more than the loss of Japan's most powerful warship. It demonstrated that even the most heavily armored vessels could not survive sustained carrier air attack once American strike coordinators achieved tactical concentration against a single target. Essex recovered McCampbell's division at 14:20 hours, the pilots landing with fuel states showing less than 10 minutes remaining flight time. The carrier's air intelligence officers conducted immediate debriefings, documenting every tactical detail while memories remained fresh. McCampbell emphasized that coordinated strafing had been critical to suppressing anti-aircraft fire, allowing dive bombers to achieve hit percentages approaching 30%, nearly 10 times the accuracy rates from attacks against ships with fully operational defensive batteries. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. The strategic implications of Musashi's sinking extended far beyond a single ship's destruction. Admiral Kurita now faced the prospect of forcing San Bernardino Strait with reduced firepower, facing American carrier groups that had demonstrated their ability to concentrate overwhelming air power against any target they chose. His intelligence summaries indicated that American forces included 17 fleet carriers, each capable of launching strike groups comparable to those that had just destroyed Musashi. The mathematical probability of his remaining battleships surviving passage through confined waters against such air superiority approached 0. At 1700 hours, Kurita issued orders for Centreforce to reverse course and withdraw westward through the Philippine Sea. His message to Combined Fleet Headquarters acknowledged that continuing the mission would result in the total destruction of Japan's remaining capital ships without achieving any operational objectives. The decision violated his original orders to reach Leyte Gulf, regardless of losses, but Kurita understood that sacrificing his entire fleet in a futile gesture served no military purpose. American intelligence detected the course reversal within 30 minutes through radio direction finding and ultra-intercepts of Japanese communications. Admiral William Halsey, commanding 3rd Fleet from his flagship New Jersey, interpreted the withdrawal as confirmation that carrier air power had achieved decisive victory over the Japanese surface fleet. His staff officers recommended maintaining air patrols over the Philippine Sea to ensure Kurita didn't reverse course again after dark, but Halsey's attention had shifted to a different threat. Reports from submarine halibut indicated that Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa's northern force had been detected 300 miles northeast of Luzon, 4 aircraft carriers, 2 battleship carriers, 3 light cruisers, and 8 destroyers steaming south toward the Philippine Sea. For Admiral William Halsey, commanding 3rd Fleet, the opportunity to destroy what remained of Japan's carrier striking power proved irresistible. What Halsey didn't recognize was that Ozawa's carriers represented a deliberate decoy. Japanese naval planners had designed Operation Sho-Go around fundamental deception, sacrificed the carriers to draw American air power northward, allowing Kurita's battleships to reverse course after dark and fall upon the vulnerable amphibious forces at Leyte Gulf. At 2000 hours on October 24th, Halsey issued the orders that would generate decades of controversy. Task Force 38, comprising 8 fleet carriers and 6 light carriers, would steam north at maximum speed. No capital ships would remain to guard San Bernardino Strait. The responsibility for blocking Kurita's possible return would fall to Admiral Thomas Kinkaid's 7th Fleet, specifically the escort carrier groups providing direct air support for MacArthur's landing forces. Escort carriers nicknamed combustible, vulnerable, expendable, by their crews bore little resemblance to Essex-class fleet carriers. Built on merchant ship hulls, they displaced 11,000 tons and achieved maximum speed of 19 knots. They carried 28 aircraft configured for ground support rather than fleet defense. Commander Ernest Evans, commanding destroyer escort. Squadron 7, assigned to protect Taffy 3, understood the mathematical impossibility of defending slow, lightly armed carriers against Japanese battleships. But at 0300 hours on October 25th, Kurita did what American planners considered irrational. Center Force reversed course, steaming eastward through San Bernardino Strait under darkness while Halsey's carriers pursued Ozawa's decoy force 250 miles north. The Japanese battleships Yamato, Nagato, Kongo, and Haruna entered the Philippine Sea unopposed. At 0645 hours, lookouts aboard destroyer escort Raymond reported mast tops visible on the northern horizon. Within minutes, the masts resolved into distinctive pagoda superstructures that could only belong to Japanese battleships. The radio transmission carried through every speaker in Taffy 3's formation. Enemy battleships, bearing 350, range 18 miles, closing at 25 knots. Rear Admiral Clifton. Sprague faced tactical mathematics offering no viable defensive solution. His 6 escort carriers could achieve 19 knots, 6 knots slower than approaching Japanese battleships. His destroyers carried weapons designed to fight submarines, not capital ships with armor plating 14 inches thick. His air group consisted of fighters configured for ground attack, not anti-ship operations. Sprague issued emergency orders at 0647 hours. All carriers would turn southeast, running at maximum speed while launching every available aircraft. The destroyers would form a defensive screen using smoke generators and their 5-inch guns to disrupt Japanese gunnery. Fighter aircraft would attack with whatever weapons they carried, bombs, rockets, machine guns, or nothing at all. The Battle off Samar began at 0659 hours, when Yamato's main battery opened fire from 32,000 yards. The 18-inch shells created massive water spouts among American formation. Lieutenant Edward Huxtable launched from Fanshawe Bay at 0705 hours, his Hellcat configured with a single 500-pound bomb. His mission brief had been simple: attack the Japanese battleships with whatever weapons you have, even if you have to throw your canteen at them. Commander Evans Johnston charged directly toward the Japanese battleships, her 5-inch guns firing while preparing a torpedo attack that amounted to a suicide mission. The sheer audacity temporarily confused Japanese tactical coordination. Admiral Kurita had expected fleet carriers protected by cruisers mounting 8-inch guns. Instead, his lookouts reported small carriers defended by insignificant escorts that were charging his battleships rather than fleeing. Johnston closed to 10,000 yards before launching her torpedoes at heavy cruiser Kumano. 2 torpedoes struck the cruiser's bow, forcing her withdrawal from battle. But Johnston's aggressive attack brought her within range of concentrated fire. 8-inch shells struck her amidships at 0720 hours, penetrating her engine room and destroying radar and fire control systems. Huxtable dove toward heavy cruiser Tone from 8,000 feet. His 500-pound general-purpose bomb struck the aft deck, penetrating thin plating before detonating among crew quarters. The explosion killed 18 sailors, but caused no significant combat damage. The tactical value had nothing to do with physical damage for 30 seconds during his approach. Tone's captain ordered emergency evasive maneuvers, temporarily breaking formation and disrupting gunnery effectiveness. The cumulative effect of 50 aircraft making individual attacks gradually degraded Japanese tactical effectiveness. Kurita's formation, which had maintained disciplined column structure, began fragmenting as individual ships executed independent maneuvers to avoid attacking aircraft. Heavy cruiser Chikuma turned so sharply to avoid a torpedo bomber that she collided with destroyer Nowaki, causing significant bow damage to both vessels. At 0745 hours, Commander Evans positioned his crippled Johnston between Japanese cruisers and the fleeing carriers. Her remaining 5-inch gun continued firing despite having no fire control system. The end came at 0820 hours, when concentrated fire overwhelmed Johnston's damage control. The destroyer rolled to port and sank at 0850 hours, taking with her 186 officers and men, including her captain. Destroyer Hoel suffered similar fate after absorbing 40 shell hits. Destroyer Samuel B. Roberts attacked heavy cruiser Chikuma at point-blank range before being torn apart by 8-inch fire. The small warship's assault damaged Chikuma sufficiently to force her withdrawal, but cost Roberts all but 90 survivors. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps. Let us continue producing in-depth content like this. The escort's sacrifice bought time for carriers to launch aircraft and create tactical confusion, but by 0 to 900 hours, Japanese cruisers had closed to within 15,000 yards. Kalinin Bay suffered 4 8-inch hits. Gambier Bay took multiple hits from Yamato's 14-inch secondary batteries. At 0907 hours, Gambier Bay's captain ordered abandon ship. The escort carrier capsized within 5 minutes, the only American aircraft carrier sunk by surface gunfire during the entire war. But the escort's sacrifice and persistent air attacks had achieved something impossible. Kurita's formation had become thoroughly disorganized, with heavy ships scattered across 20 miles while pursuing individual targets. Radio reports contradicted each other regarding carrier positions and damage assessments. Intercepted American transmissions indicated that fleet carriers were approaching from the North Halseas, forces returning after realizing they'd been deceived. At 0925 hours, Admiral Kurita issued orders that would generate decades of controversy. Center Force would break off engagement and retire through San Bernardino Strait before American fleet carriers could achieve tactical concentration. The amphibious shipping at Leyte Gulf, only 40 miles away and virtually defenseless, would remain unmolested. Admiral Sprague watched in disbelief as Japanese warships reversed course at 0930 hours. His Taffy 3 had survived through desperate courage, tactical confusion, and weather conditions that degraded Japanese gunnery. The cost had been profound. 1 carrier sunk, 2 severely damaged, 3 escorts destroyed, and nearly 1,000 sailors dead. Statistical analysis revealed that Japanese battleships and cruisers had fired over 1,300 major-caliber shells, approximately 1 shell for every man in Sprague's force. Yet only 1 carrier sank, largely because Japanese armor-piercing shells passed completely through lightly built escort carriers before detonating, their fuses designed for battleship armor rather than thin-skinned hulls. Halsey's carriers engaged Ozawa's northern force at dawn, launching strikes against Japanese carriers that possessed no aircraft. The battle represented target practice, with American aircraft systematically sinking all 4 carriers, plus a light cruiser, and 2 destroyers. But Halsey's decisive victory contrasted sharply with his failure to prevent Kurita's penetration, a strategic failure that would reshape American naval doctrine. Essex returned to Ulithi Atoll on October 28th. McCampbell's combat record included 34 confirmed victories plus participation in destroying 2 battleships, making him the most decorated naval aviator in American history. But 4 continuous days of combat operations had exhausted pilots who had flown multiple missions under extreme stress. Flight Surgeon Commander Robert Miller documented widespread combat fatigue symptoms. Pilots reported insomnia, persistent anxiety, and recurring nightmares. The intensity of carrier warfare had exceeded psychological endurance limits, even among experienced combat veterans. Japan's strategic situation after Leyte Gulf approached mathematical impossibility. The Imperial Navy had lost 3 battleships, 4 carriers, 10 cruisers, and 11 destroyers, approximately 30% of remaining combat strength. American losses totaled 1 light carrier, 2 escort carriers, and several destroyers. More significantly, Japan had lost trained air crews necessary to operate carrier aircraft. Pilot training programs had collapsed under fuel shortages, reducing graduation standards to levels that produced aviators who could barely take off and land. The destruction of Japanese carrier aviation created a vacuum filled by kamikaze operations, suicide attacks, requiring minimal pilot skill, but achieving 15% hit rates. Escort carrier Street Low became the first vessel sunk by kamikaze on October 25th, when a Zero fighter crashed through her flight deck. But kamikaze tactics represented desperation. For every successful attack, 10 kamikazes were destroyed before reaching targets. The exchange ratio accelerated Japan's pilot shortage, while American shipyards replaced losses faster than kamikazes could sink vessels. McCampbell's final combat mission occurred on November 3rd during strikes against Manila Bay installations. His division encountered 8 Zero fighters. The engagement lasted 12 minutes and resulted in 7 Japanese aircraft destroyed without American losses. McCampbell personally shot down 3 Zeros, bringing his final confirmed total to 34, the Navy's highest for the remainder of the war. The Battle of Leyte Gulf represented the largest naval engagement in human history, involving over 350 ships and nearly 2,000 aircraft across 4 separate actions spanning 3 days. American victory guaranteed Japan's ultimate defeat by severing maritime supply lines, connecting home islands with Southeast Asian resources. Without oil from the Dutch East Indies, Japan's war economy entered terminal collapse. Admiral Sprague's report on the Battle of Samar concluded with observation that would resonate through naval history. The failure of the enemy to completely wipe out all vessels can be attributed to our smokescreen, our torpedo counterattack, continuous harassment by aircraft, timely maneuvers, and the definite partiality of Almighty God. The reference to divine intervention reflected understanding that survival exceeded reasonable expectation, but analysis revealed tactical factors had been decisive, aggressive. Destroyer attacks disrupted Japanese coordination. Persistent airstrikes created impression of larger forces than existed, and smoke screens degraded optical gunnery during critical periods. The 72 hours between October 23rd and 25th, 1944, marked the effective end of the Imperial Japanese Navy as a strategic force. Japan retained ships but lacked fuel to operate them, trained aircrews to fly from carriers, or realistic prospect of winning engagements against American task forces that achieved superiority in every category. Lieutenant Huxtable wrote in his journal, "We accomplished what military necessity required and prevented enemy forces from reaching our troops. The knowledge that our actions saved American lives doesn't eliminate images of burning ships and men dying in the water. War demands choices that defy comfortable moral categorization. The mathematical reality remained inescapable. American industrial capacity had produced enough carriers, aircraft, and trained personnel to absorb losses that would have been catastrophic for any other nation while continuing offensive operations without pause." By November 1944, the United States Navy operated more carriers than Japan had constructed during its entire naval history. That disparity reflected fundamental differences in economic systems and national mobilization that determined strategic outcomes independent of tactical brilliance or individual courage. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.